Psalm 30. I will extol you, O Lord, for you have drawn me up, and did not let my foes rejoice over me. O Lord my God, I cried to you for help, and you have healed me. O Lord, you brought up my soul from Sheol, restored me to life from among those gone down to the pit. Sing praises to the Lord, O you his faithful ones, and give thanks to his holy name. For his anger is but a moment, his favour is for a lifetime. Weeping may linger for the night, but joy comes with the morning. As for me, I said in my prosperity, I shall never be moved. By your favour, O Lord, you have established me as a strong mountain. You hid your face, I was dismayed. To you, O Lord, I cried, and to the Lord I made supplication. What profit is there in my death if I go down to the pit? Will the dust praise you? Will it tell of your faithfulness? Hear, O Lord, and be gracious to me. O Lord, be my helper. You have turned my mourning into dancing, and you have taken off my sackcloth and clothed me with joy, so that my soul may praise you and not be silent. O Lord my God, I will give thanks to you forever.
Today's Gospel reading is from John chapter 20, starting at verse 24. But Thomas, who was called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, and put my finger in the mark of the nails and my hand in his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe." Last week we heard from Reverend Tim how difficult following Jesus can be, how disordered loves get in the way of being a disciple of God. If you weren't able to be with us last week, you can always watch the recording on YouTube. You'll remember that the takeaway from Reverend Tim was that we need to put following Jesus in the urgent and important box on the planning scheme. Following Jesus, being his disciple, being someone who learns from him and emulates him needs to be up there as the most important thing on our to-do list, the priority of all priorities. This week we're thinking about another challenge, the challenge of remembering Jesus, and remembering Jesus, how it helps us believe. Why do we need to remember who Jesus was and is and what he has done for us corporately and individually? Well, because it strengthens our faith and helps us live life as a Christian. If you don't remember and believe sincerely with your whole heart what God has done in Jesus to spend eternity with you, if you don't remember and believe that Jesus was who he said he was, if you don't remember and believe that he lived, died and was buried and was raised to life again to fix our relationship with God, then why would you put following Jesus and telling others about him in the urgent and important box? This morning, perhaps you've been a churchgoer for decades, and it might seem like a strange question, are you remembering Jesus? But it is one I believe we must ask ourselves regularly, because it's so easy to forget what we believe, who we believe in, why we believe. And really, it's easy to forget how reality-shattering Jesus Christ is and was. And it's easy just to put Jesus on the shelf and only take it down and dust him off on Sundays. For many of us, our experiences of Jesus have been transformative. Many of you watching today will have stories from your life about how God intervened, perhaps how he healed you or guided you or rescued you or comforted you through a really difficult time in your life, or how he turned your life around and gave you a hope and a future. Perhaps you've never told that story. Perhaps you've told it to everyone that you've met. Either way, I bet it's a story around which your faith revolves. But over time, even those amazing stories of salvation and transformation can fade. We can start to forget what Jesus said to us, what he did for us, and why he is so important to us. My wife Jenny and I, we work from home, but even still we work in different rooms, and we often joke we're like ships passing in the daytime. When we think the other person has gotten too busy with things of life, one of the things we'll do is we'll hug them all of a sudden and say, remember me? It's got a love language that helps us stop and just remember the reasons why we chose that person, why we married them, and why we're with them. And anyone who's been married knows that you have to work at marriage. And so this remember me is a gentle reminder not to get overwhelmed at the things of life, but to remember the other person, why we love them, the reasons we're together. It's so vital. And to be fair, it's Jenny that often says it to me most of all. Moses in the Bible understood that human beings forget even the most important things. In Deuteronomy 4:9, he says to the Israelites, only be careful and watch yourselves closely so you don't forget the things your eyes have seen or let them fade from your heart as long as you live. Teach them to your children and to their children after them. Remember and believe. Today we're thinking about the Apostle Thomas, one of Jesus' 12 closest friends. I want this morning to try and redeem him a little bit from that rotten nickname, Doubting Thomas. I want to suggest that after Jesus' crucifixion, after the trauma of Thomas seeing his rabbi arrested, tortured and killed, there may have been several very good reasons why he didn't immediately believe that Jesus had risen from the dead when the other disciples told him what they had seen. So, what are these reasons? Well, first, Thomas wasn't with the disciples when Jesus appeared to them. You'll remember that the followers of Jesus were hiding out because they were afraid of what the religious leaders might do to them. But it seems they were hiding together as a group, which frankly isn't really very clever. If you want to avoid being arrested, then surely you'd scatter. So individually you'd be harder to find, but that's not what they did. They gathered together. And as a result, 10 of the apostles saw the risen Jesus appear in that locked room. Thomas was not there, so he did not. So the first point here is that he wasn't with the family of believers and missed out on Jesus' presence and power. The other disciples had their minds blown, their understanding of reality altered, and their faith amped up to 11 when Jesus appeared before them. Thomas missed out on that because he decided to stand apart from his worshipping community. Now, I'm not judging him. He had gone through a massively traumatic time, was on the run from the authorities. He did what he had to do. But as a result, he missed out when Jesus stood in the disciples' midst and said, peace be with you. The lesson for us here is that where 2 or 3 are gathered, where Jesus is there also. And being with other believers helps us meet with Jesus and helps us remember who he is. Being with the disciples would have helped Thomas remember who Jesus was to them. In Paul's letter to the Hebrews, we read, we should not give up meeting together, but rather encourage one another and spur one another on. If Thomas had done that, if he decided to be with the other disciples, to encourage them and be encouraged, then he would have not missed Jesus' return that first time. There's a story which I couldn't find the reference for, annoyingly, but it's about a younger man visiting an older man, concerned that he, the younger man, was losing his faith. The older man said nothing in reply. He just takes a red glowing coal from the fire and puts it on the floor, and the pair watch it go cold and black. And then the old man returns the coal to the fire and watches it get red and hot again. And of course, the lesson is that we burn brightly for Jesus when we're with other believers. So the second reason that Thomas didn't believe that Jesus had risen from the dead was because it seems he had forgotten all of Jesus' power, the miracles, the signs of God's kingdom. I mean, he was someone that had spent 3 years following Jesus, learning from him, seeing the most remarkable miracles, people healed, water turned to wine, thousands fed with fish and loaves, and the dead raised to life. Not years ago, but days ago, actually. Before the resurrection, Thomas would have seen Jesus healing the ear of the servant of the high priest, which Peter had cut off with a sword. You can read about that in Luke 22. Now, I've no doubt Thomas was traumatized by what he saw the religious leaders and the Romans do to Jesus. Was he so emotionally and mentally shocked by that event that he couldn't even bring to mind what Jesus had done for Jairus' daughter or Lazarus when he brought them back from the dead? And what about us? When things go badly, do we remember the power of Jesus that we've seen in our own lives or the lives of our church family, or the stories of Jesus' power we've heard about? Or do we slip into a place of hopelessness, convinced that Jesus can do nothing, that he's beaten and dead and gone? The other disciples told Thomas, Jesus is alive. But Thomas didn't believe them. In his pain and his sorrow, he forgot all those things he'd seen with his own eyes and believed the lies of the enemy, that Jesus could do nothing against the power of death. A third reason Thomas didn't believe was because he also forgot not only what Jesus had said about himself, prophesied about himself, but also what the Hebrew scriptures had said about him. Bible scholars say that they think there are between 200 and 400 prophecies or references about Jesus in the Old Testament. In the Gospel of Luke, after the Road to Emmaus episode, we read that when Jesus does visit all the remaining disciples, he tells them they should have remembered what was written in the scriptures. This is what is written. The Messiah will suffer and rise from the dead on the third day, and repentance for the forgiveness of sins will be preached in his name to all nations, beginning at Jerusalem. Again, Thomas had sat at Jesus' feet while he was preaching and teaching in the synagogue on the mountainside and in private with the disciples. He would have heard again and again what Jesus was telling them about his resurrection, but he didn't remember what had been written or spoken about. Now, to be fair to Thomas, according to Psychology Today magazine, the broadest reason we forget things is that in our everyday lives we focus on understanding the world, not remembering. Understanding, not remembering. And there was so much the disciples didn't understand about what Jesus said and did, and lots in scriptures they wouldn't have understood either. But we don't have that excuse, really. We have the Old Testament that Jesus read. We have the New Testament filled with promises and true stories and history and more. And if we really get to know it, if we learn to remember it and understand it, then we can know who Jesus is and we can believe in him. He can become for us almost a mental anchor for our lives, someone we rely on and turn to in good times and bad. Another reason Thomas didn't believe in Jesus' resurrection is that he set his own standard for belief in Jesus. And that's not really faith at all, is it? He told his friends, unless I see the nail marks in his hands, put my fingers where the nails were, and put my hands into his side, I won't believe. In Hebrews 11, the Apostle Paul writes, faith is the reality of what we hope for, the proof of what we don't see. And in 2 Corinthians, we walk by faith and not by sight. Faith is crucial because it's faith in the risen Jesus. It's at the heart of our salvation. Thomas's response to his friends' claim that Jesus had risen was a demand for proof. And because he wouldn't believe, he was forced to live through a week from hearing about Jesus' resurrection to seeing him in person, when he didn't live with any of the benefits of God's new kingdom. Thomas lived a week without the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Those fruits that come from believing in the resurrected Jesus Christ. He could have been worshipping with his friends. He could have had a week without pain, misery, and mourning. Instead, he chose to wait for proof. How much proof do you need to believe? How long will you wait? How long will you miss out on what God has in store for you because you don't have enough proof that Jesus is alive? What if Thomas had taken a step of faith, knowing what he did about Jesus, seeing the passion and the excitement of his friends, looking back at the scriptures? What if he'd said, well, you know what, that's enough for me to step into a life of joy and purpose? If you're not following Jesus this morning and that idea intrigues you, please get in touch. I would love to talk to you about it. Finally then, have a look at this picture. Is the cat climbing up the stairs or down the stairs? Well, according to the Minds Journal website, if you set up, you have an optimistic view of life. You see potential and growth wherever you look. And if you said the cat is walking down, then you have a more pessimistic side. But that's not a bad thing. The website suggests that you pessimists don't believe things or trust easily, but you're harder to trick or to deceive. Now, honestly, I don't know how much genuine psychology there is in all this test, but don't take it too seriously. But I suspect that Thomas would have seen the cat descending. I think it's likely, given what little we know of him. He's a skeptic, a bit of a pessimist. In John 11, when Jesus decides to head to Bethany near Jerusalem, it's Thomas who says to the other disciples, "Let us also go that we may die with him." Thomas is likely convinced that bad things will happen to Jesus if he goes back to Jerusalem. He's automatically choosing the worst case scenario. There's no hope there, there's no optimism, there's no trusting necessarily that God will act. And when his friends tell him about Jesus' resurrection, he responds in a similar way, doesn't he? He doesn't expect it to be true. He expects disappointment. Perhaps his heart was broken seeing Jesus arrested and crucified. Perhaps he's not willing to let that happen again by believing that Jesus might indeed be alive. Perhaps his denial, his disbelief and his doubt is a self-protection mechanism. But what kind of life is that for any of us? Could we hold Jesus in such a little esteem that we think he'll break our hearts over and over? That it'll let us down every time we put our trust in him? Does any Bible story tell us that's the case? No. Proverbs, we hear, trust in the Lord with all your heart. And why should we do that? Because as Jesus told Thomas, blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. So we've seen this morning, haven't we, that Thomas should have been with the family of believers, so they would have all have experienced the power of the resurrected Christ. He should have remembered all the amazing things that Jesus had done during his earthly ministry. He should have held on to them and not let grief or fear wash them away. Thomas should have remembered what Jesus had told him about his resurrection and opened the scriptures again to remind himself what was written there. Thomas should have believed his friends about the risen Jesus and stepped into a life of faith, of joy, peace and hope, rather than living in fear and anxiety and doubt. And finally, he should have overcome his own tendency not to expect much from Jesus, or even his fear that Jesus might let him down. The Dutch Christian who saved Jews during the Second World War, Corrie ten Boom, said, "Never be afraid to trust an unknown future with a known God." We are living in that same week as Thomas, between hearing Jesus was resurrected and meeting Jesus in person. We've heard this good news that Jesus is alive, but we're not yet with him. But let's not wait like Thomas. Let's choose to remember and believe who this Jesus is, and choose to worship him now, today, and to say to him with joy in our hearts, "My Lord and my God." Amen.
Jesus, be the center, be my source, be my life, Jesus. Jesus, be the center, be my hope, be my song, Jesus. Be the fire in my heart, be the wind in these sails, be the reason that I live, Jesus, Jesus. Jesus, be my vision, be my man, be my guide, Jesus. Jesus, be the center, be my hope, be my song, Jesus. Be the fire in my heart, be the wind in these sails, be the reason that I live, Jesus, Jesus. Be the fire in my heart, be the wind in these sails, be the reason that I live, Jesus, 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 Jesus.